Director of Knowledge Exchange at Women's Shelters Canada, and I'm going to be hosting our webinar today. I'm really looking forward to today's topic, today's conversation. I hope it will be really informative, really helpful for folks, and I know we have a lot to cover, so yeah, looking forward to all of that. I do want to start by acknowledging that I'm joining you today from the traditional unceded territories of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people in the city colonially known as Ottawa. And I do want to acknowledge my responsibility as a settler on these lands to continue to learn about the historical and present impacts of settler colonialism and to support the work of reconciliation and decolonization. I know there are folks here from lots of different places today, so please do feel free to use the chat at the bottom of your screen to say hi, introduce yourself, let us know where you're joining from. You don't have your video or mic today if you're joining us, but we would still love to know who's here. So please do feel free to say hi and let us know where you're from. So one kind of last reminder, we do have interpretation today. The presentations are going to be in English and they'll be interpreted into French. So if you do want to hear anything in French, please feel free to go down to the bottom of your screen, choose interpretation and click on either English or French. And if you are having any issues with the interpretation, just let myself or my colleague Nika know in the chat and we will help you out. So as I mentioned, if you're here listening in, you don't have video or mic, we do still want you to participate today. We're just trying to keep the audio really clear and clean for everyone here. So there's a couple ways you can participate. At the bottom of your screen, there's the chat, which some of you are already using to say hi, which is lovely. It's great to see everyone here. So continue to use the chat throughout to say hi, to make a comment, to, interact with us. That's great. If you have a question though, a question for the presenters, I'm going to ask you to put that in the Q&A. So the Q&A should be more or less right beside your chat box. And that's a great place to put your question because it just helps me see them all, keep track of them all. They won't get lost the way they might get lost in the chat. So if you have a question for our presenters, please put it in the Q&A. You don't have to save them all till the end. Put them in when it's on your mind. And that way you won't forget, I won't miss it. It's all there. We are recording today's webinar, so everyone who registered will receive a link to the recording afterwards. We're also going to share copies of the presentations. So just so you know, that's coming. All right, well, I think those are all the little reminders. So as you know, today our focus is on funding for capital projects in the GBV shelter sector. So I'm sure those of you who have thought about or gotten started with, maybe building a new shelter, doing a pretty major renovation on your existing shelter, you know how expensive that kind of project can be. And I'm sure it feels very daunting and overwhelming at the beginning to think about raising millions of dollars. And so we're here today to help with that, to share a few tips and strategies and considerations, things to think about as you head through that project. So we're going to start by hearing from Kyla and Megan, who are Women's Shelters Canada's wonderful second stage transitional housing new build team. And they're going to talk about, the funding stack, some things to think about around government funding for capital projects and that kind of thing. Then we'll hear from Nikki and Stephanie, our amazing grants and development team, and they're going to talk about approaching companies, foundations, individual donors, and so they'll talk about that side of things. And then we're going to hear about two examples, two shelters that have successfully done capital fundraising, and they'll share so we have Melissa, the CEO of YWCA Regina, who's going to speak to her experience. And then Kyla and Megan will be speaking to the experience of Sussex Vale Transition House, which they worked very closely on. So we will hear those two examples of what worked, what to think about, what to take from their experience, what to learn. And then we're going to have Q&A. So definitely put your questions in as we go. Awesome. So before we jump in, I'm going to put a quick little poll up for you all. because this will help us just get a better sense of who's here and why you're here and what stage you're at. So take a minute, that should be up on your screen now, and let us know what sector you're in. Are you with a shelter? Are you with a different type of community service organization? Are you from sort of the building construction world, or something else? And if it's something else, let us know what that is in the chat. And then the second question is, are you doing a capital project right now? Are you sort of in the middle of one? You're thinking about it, or you're just here for fun, which is great. Okay, so some folks are still answering. I'm going to give everyone another minute or so to do that. Awesome. So it looks like most folks have jumped in there. I'm going to end the poll and share with everyone what we have. So 95% of you are from the shelter sector. We do have some non-shelter community service providers and an other. So do feel free to let us know where you're from. And then a good mix here. So 36% of you saying you're in the middle of a capital project right now, and 60% that you're thinking about doing one in the future. 5% are here just to learn, which I love. Thank you for being here. That's great. Okay, so without further ado, I am going to pass it over to Kyla and Megan to get us started.
Thanks, Leah. Just gonna get the screen set up. Perfect. Thanks, Megan. So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this webinar. So we decided to do this because we often have executive directors and shelter CEOs asking us really like a lot of questions about funding a capital project. So we hear questions like, when are they supposed to launch their capital campaign? Should they hire somebody internally or hire a consulting firm to help them? Who should they even be approaching to ask for money? And how much money should they already have before they go kind of like public with a campaign? And all of these are great questions. And it's really hard, always answering them one-on-one. And it kind of takes a few different people, basically everybody you're going to hear from today, to be able to answer these. So we want to be able to share some tips and tricks with you today to be able to navigate each piece of this funding puzzle. Megan and I are going to be your first presenters. So we're going to try and set the stage for the webinar by introducing the types of funding, and then we'll tackle the first piece of that puzzle, which is federal government funding. So I'm going to start with an initial picture of what kinds of funding you need for a capital project and do a bit of background and set kind of like some context for today. I'm going to set the stage. And then Megan's going to go into pre-construction funding and capital funding, which are two components of project costs. She's also going to discuss the federal government funding, and specifically, she's going to talk about Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, CMHC, as well as the new Build Canada homes. And then we'll finish up with some recommendations for getting your federal funding for your project. So before starting, we wanted to say kind of who we are and why we're the ones to discuss this with you. So Megan and I work on the second stage transitional housing new build project. As a part of this, we offer project management services for new capital projects. So our role as project managers is to guide projects through the 4 development phases, starting with feasibility, design development, construction, and operations. It's really likely that shelter organizations like yours don't have in-house project management expertise on staff. There's probably not a need because you're maybe just doing a one-off project. So we're actually able to come and offer this as a service. So we're working with the shelter staff to create a vision for the project, competitively hire consultants like the architect and the builder, and we would manage their contracts throughout the entire process. We're going to create and manage really complex budgets. And our highest one that we're working on right now is actually $37 million. So it's a big project. We create project schedules, make sure the whole team adheres to them, draft and revise like time-sensitive funding applications for all 3 levels of government, and many more tasks throughout the process. Essentially, we're wearing the shelter's hat in these meetings, and we're representing them to the best of our ability, be it with funders, architect, builder, and we're distilling this complex jargon-filled information to the ED or CEO as the decision maker. We're really trying to like alleviate stress levels for them when they're working on these expensive and stressful projects. We find that shelter EDs and CEOs just don't have the time or expertise to carry this out. It's not feasible to try and do this work like really well off the side of your desk, but it's stuff that Megan and I do every day. So, literally this morning, we actually submitted an application to CMHC on behalf of a shelter. And in the last 3 years since we launched this project at Women's Shelters Canada, Megan and I have successfully applied for nearly $17 million for shelter organizations and then helped secure an additional 30 million. So we feel like government grants is definitely something that we know a lot about and are excited to talk to you about today. But before we get to that, we wanted to go over all of the types of funding sources. So there's a lot of different ones that you're going to want to explore for a capital project. Unfortunately, projects really can't rely on a single source of funding today. Like that used to be the case in the past, but now you really do need a mix of several of these sources. And so we call this the funding stack. It's because you're going to be stacking all of these funds, and you need these as your sources to be able to equal your total project cost. So if your total project cost for your new build is $3 million, or if it's $30 million, you have to find enough funding to pay for all of it. And you're going to do that with these sources that are here on the page. So we have them in this order specifically because we're prioritizing where you would ideally get your funding from. So government grants being the first one. This is money that you don't have to pay back, and you're going to want this from all three levels of government. So we can't speak to all the details of municipal and provincial ones today because there's a lot out there, but Megan's going to go over the federal options later. Partnership funding could be if you're building with another organization on your site. This might be like a daycare or another housing provider, and they could bring either their own equity or maybe they've got access to grants that your organization isn't eligible for. So bringing their money to the table is amazing. But equity is a big one. So that's money from your own organization. There's a few ways you can do this. One could be cash reserves. This is money you've set aside for a rainy day, or in this case, a capital build. Fundraising is a large source. You'll likely ask for both foundations and corporations for funding, which Nikki and Stephanie are going to go into detail on this. There's surplus revenue. These are funds that were extra at the end of a fiscal year and could be put towards the cash reserve. And then there's assets. So if your organization owns your own land for a project, or maybe even if you're selling a building or a property to be able to fund your new project. And finally, financing could be an option. So if you don't have enough funding from those first three big categories, government, partnerships, and equity, to cover all of your project costs, so if they don't equal that $3 or $30 million that you need, you can explore financing as the option to kind of fill that last gap. But you can only access financing if you have enough income to pay for it after you cover all your operating costs. So if you're thinking about when you're operating the building, all of those costs, maybe you already have some grants for that too. But if you're fundraising for your operational costs, you're not going to be able to finance. It's a mortgage that you're having to pay monthly. So you need to demonstrate to your lender that you actually have money to pay them each month. And fundraising, they can't always rely on that. So from our experience, every project will have both government grant and equity. In some cases, a partnership might be used. It depends on your project. And in some cases, shelter organizations will access financing. But when are you trying to get all these different types of funding? So we thought it might be helpful to look at a timeline of capital projects. Hopefully this doesn't seem too overwhelming. I'm going to go through it piece by piece. So across the top is that timeline. So your project is beginning with an idea. Maybe that's like quite a few people here. It sounded like 60% had like an idea for a project. From there, you move into feasibility. So you're figuring out if it's actually going to be viable or not. Does the cost make sense, for example? And once you go through that, you're going to go into design development and actually be working on your architectural drawings, and then construction when you're building the building, and then finally you're operating it. So Megan's going to get into more detail about this part, but project costs can be broken down into two parts. We think of it as pre-construction funding and then your capital funding. Pre-construction is needed to cover the costs during feasibility and design development. As design development wraps up, so when you're kind of finishing your architectural drawings, ideally you can start accessing your capital funding, but in some cases, you actually might not be able to access that until you have a shovel in the ground. So that's why you really do need pre-construction funding to pay for the costs during that timeline. And then below the timeline, we have the funding stack that I talked about on the previous slide. So, government grants being your best source of funds, you can really only access these once you're into feasibility because you have to be able to tell your government funder about your project, right? So, you need more than just an idea. You have to kind of have something on the page. You're going to continue with the government grants throughout all phases of the project. So, keep applying when those open up and when you come across them. Your partnership funding is a similar timeline. You're going to need to know that you want to include a daycare or another provider before you're actually approaching that potential partner. So you have to have a bit of an outline of the project. You have to have done a little bit of work on it. And then the cash reserves are really like that first source of funds. So that's the part that, might even predate ideation. But we think of this as like your nest egg. It might have been growing before your organization even considered a capital project. We'll hear from that with the Sussex Vale transition house example later. And then once you know you do want to do a build, it's good to start collecting as much money as you can and continue to grow that cash reserve throughout the development process. Fundraising is probably going to begin during design development, and it's best to have a business case that you can show your potential donors. So at that point, you really do want to be further along and have some drawings. And that should continue all through construction as well. And a capital project, it's usually a pretty exciting way and a nice way to raise money. A lot of people like something that's tangible. It's really clear. You're going to have a set number of units, number of families that you're going to be having in there. So, yeah, that's like a good thing to be able to fundraise for. And Stephanie, Nikki, and Melissa is going to talk a bit more about fundraising as well. And then the capital campaign will run along a very similar timeline to your fundraising. It can be thought of maybe as even like the quiet part of the capital campaign, but the capital campaign is when you want all hands on deck. So the ED or CEO, whoever's in charge of the organization, is likely going to be the face of your campaign. And Melissa's going to share her experience about that. And then finally, financing would be at the end. You're probably locking that in really close to the end of design development before you go into construction, because ultimately you want to have, hit on all of these other funds and then seen until the very last second, what is your gap? And then you're closing that with your financing. So you're going to do that near the end. I'm going to pass it over to Megan for the rest.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyla. Um, so at this point, you're going to have a general understanding of the different types of funding that make up the capital funding stack. You also have an idea of when these different types of funding need to be secured. So at the start of your capital project, during the feasibility phase and partway into design and development, you're going to need pre-construction funding. These are the costs that lead up to construction. They're the ones that are going to get you ready to move into construction. So examples of pre-construction fees can include paying your architect to progress your designs, conducting site studies to prepare the land for development, involving your lawyer to review any agreements or contracts, including your construction manager to provide input into the designs, community engagement fees, so on. There's a lot of work that gets done prior to the construction of your building, so you'll be spending a good chunk of cash to get yourself ready to apply for those big dollar amounts. Those are going to be your capital funding applications. Some shelters do spend close to $1 million before construction begins. Obviously, this will depend on the size of your project, but it is a significant amount of money that you'll need to be investing. There are some pre-construction funding opportunities to help nonprofits and charities cover these costs. The main national funders for pre-construction include CMHC and FCM. FCM is the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. So CMHC has their seed funding program. It generally opens on March 1st each year. It's really competitive, and so it's recommended to get your application in within 2 weeks of it opening. You can receive up to $150,000 in grant funding and up to $350,000 in loan. And FCM has two grant funding streams for pre-construction costs. They call their planning grant and the study grant. Unfortunately, applications closed early this year just because they ran out of funds. They do hope to have those funds replenished in April of 2026, according to their website. So we do encourage you to keep an eye out for that. You could receive up to $30,000 for the planning grant and up to $250,000 for the study grant. There are other pre construction funding programs available depending on what province you live in, your municipality, or your region. You could also connect with the private, family, or community foundations for some early funding, and Nikki and Stephanie will get into that. So, as Kyla said earlier, in the later half of the design and development phase, you'll need to start applying for capital funds. Those are the big dollar amounts that are going to fund the construction of your project. So, your construction fees or your capital fees are split into two categories: your hard costs and your soft costs. So, your hard costs are the building materials and the labor. This cost is provided to you by your construction manager or your builder. They are the tangible costs that you can touch and you can see. Soft costs are expenses related to consultants that are needed throughout the construction process. Examples of these fees would include your architect, your project manager, any other consultants. Basically, if it's not a building material or the labor to build the building, it's going to be a soft cost. You'll be paying for these capital fees with the sources that you are acquiring in your capital funding stack. So, what Kyla explained earlier, your funding stack is made up of the government grants, your partnerships, your equity, and financing. So, for government grants at the national level, the main capital funder is CMHC. CMHC is first and foremost a financial institution. Their role has primarily been to provide mortgage loan insurance and mortgage funding to lenders. They also conduct a lot of research about the housing market. Starting in 2017, they also delivered the government's housing programs listed under the National Housing Strategy. So the programs have changed a lot over the years. Some have been retired, some have been renamed, new ones have been introduced, and many have changed their criteria or their eligibility requirements. Just some examples of past streams include the Women and Children Shelter and Transitional Housing Initiative. That was 250 million specifically for women's shelters and transitional housing in 2002. There were 3 rounds of the Rapid Housing Initiative for affordable housing providers. CMHC's also had their National Housing Co-Investment Fund, which was renamed the Affordable Housing Fund, which has since developed substreams, the Community Housing Substream and the Rapid Housing Substream. All this to say that CMHC hasn't had the exact same program since 2017. They changed and they continue to change. However, these days, CMHC is closing a lot of their programs as those funds are being fully allocated and not replenished. There was a top up announced recently for the loan program with the community housing substream, and some of the grant money for housing programs planned for the future have been accelerated to be allocated today. But for the most part, CMHC is phasing out their programs and the government housing portfolio is transitioning to Build Canada Homes under the new Liberal government. So, under this new leadership in government, they've created Build Canada Homes. It was launched on September 14th, 2025, so it's still fairly new, and a lot of the direction right now is unclear. We don't know very much, and Women's Shelters Canada isn't an authority on this, but this is what we do know right now. So, Build Canada Homes is a new federal entity held under the Department of Housing, Infrastructure, and Communities. The plan is for Build Canada Homes to become a standalone federal agency in 2026. Their objectives are to build non market housing themselves, finance non market housing for other housing providers and developers, and also stimulate Canada's building economy through the exploration of new construction technologies. So, they're very focused on modular and prefabricated housing. They seem to be looking for projects that prioritize these new construction technologies. They're also very interested in building housing at scale and quickly, so they want to fund larger projects of more than 300 units or funding a portfolio of multiple smaller projects. They also want to improve their coordination with the provinces and municipalities regarding applications. And they've also announced that 1 billion of their funds will be earmarked for transitional and supportive housing for people who are experiencing homelessness. We are unclear on when this will be released, over what time period, and what the application process looks like, but that is there. Currently, we aren't sure what any of this is going to look like in practice right now. Build Canada Homes is open to discussing proposals, but there's no formal application or portal right now. So I think this will be more of a wait and see situation until more information is provided. But in the meantime, you can still set yourselves up for success when the time comes to acquire your capital federal funding. We have some recommendations here for you to consider. So, we encourage you to try your best to secure free land and have it assessed so that you can include this as your contribution to the project in your applications. Land is often one of the most expensive components of a housing project outside of the actual building costs, the hard costs. If you can secure it at no cost through donation, transfer, or partnership, it becomes a really powerful form of equity that your funders will notice, and it's at no cost to your organization. We also encourage you to try to get other levels of government supportive of the application, contributing capital if they can. In our experience with CMHC, they do look favorably on projects with multi-level government support. Does signal to them that you have a stable project and a shared commitment to getting it built. We also strongly recommend hiring a project manager to support you through. Kyla and I say this a lot, and Kyla actually said it earlier in the presentation, but embarking on a new development project is akin to adding a second full time job to your plate. Without a project manager, you'd have to do this second job off the side of your desk. So, with a project manager, they can really alleviate this burden and use their expertise and knowledge about affordable housing development. They are going to guide you through the entire project lifecycle. They'll track your project progress. They'll coordinate the design team. They'll complete and submit funding applications for you. They're going to meet deadlines, you name it. They do play a really big role in securing federal funding for you. So we do highly recommend having a project manager on your team. You're also going to want to be hiring team members that you trust. It's your architect, your construction manager. They play a role in the project's design and the cost. You want a team that understands your project vision and they can maximize cost efficiencies to save you money in the long run. Hiring team members that also have experience building CMHC funded projects is really important. They also know what to expect and they can anticipate what's going to be needed from them to keep your project moving forward. And Kyla mentioned this earlier, but we do recommend saving some cash reserves for your project. Not only are they helpful when you're kickstarting your project, but you'll likely need to contribute your own equity to the capital funding stack. CMHC likes to see applicants contribute their own equity, which shows commitment and reduces risk. Um, when planning and designing your project, we encourage you to pay particular attention to social and environmental outcomes. Government funders like projects that maximize affordability, prioritize serving vulnerable communities, maximize accessibility in their design, and also improve energy efficiency. And your project team can help you develop a project that meets and maximizes these outcomes. And finally, we do recommend considering financing if you can afford it. Sometimes it can be difficult to secure grant or contribution funding to cover all of your project costs. Sometimes they're not enough to close that funding gap. And so, if financing is an option for your organization, you can consider that. CMHC does offer affordable rates. And so, with that, that concludes our portion of the webinar. We hope this information today about government funding was helpful for you. If you have more specific questions about your project, you can send an email to our project inbox there on the screen, and we can book a one-on-one meeting with you. Otherwise, if you have questions about our presentation today, you can ask it at the end of the webinar. And I think I'm going to stop there and pass it on.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Megan and Kyla. So much really, really good, helpful information there. Yeah, so I'm just going to echo Megan's reminder to put questions in the Q&A box as we go, if you have them, so that we can really jump in and get through a lot of questions at the end. And I'm going to pass it right to Stephanie and Nikki, and I will bring your PowerPoint up.
Thank you, Leah. Hi, everyone. I am Stephanie, and I'm joined today by Nikki. Together, we support the fundraising and development work at Women's Shelters Canada. Our focus for this part of the webinar is to share some practical fundraising strategies, specifically how to engage and build support from non governmental funders, including corporations, foundations, and individual donors. We know that for many shelters, fundraising is not a full time role. You might not have a staff person dedicated to it, and you're often balancing this work alongside everything else that comes with running programs and supporting survivors. So, our goal is to make this session as relevant and doable as possible wherever you're starting from. And judging by the poll, there's a few of you starting from some different points. We'll highlight ideas and tools that you can adapt to your own context, whether you're planning a future capital project or just starting to think about it. So, as Kyla mentioned, every capital project relies on a combination of different funding sources: government programs, foundations, corporations, individuals, and often community based fundraising. What we're focusing on in this section is really the fundraising side of that stack, all of those non governmental dollars that help make a project possible. And even with this fundraising piece, you're also looking at drawing from multiple sources. Each source brings something different to the table, and there's rarely a single funder who will cover a project from start to finish. The most successful projects are those that can demonstrate, as Kyla said, some sort of equity or early commitment, whether that's a lead donor or what your shelter has saved over time. It can then become much easier to attract other funders. It signals that you have momentum, your community is behind you, and that your project is a solid investment. And so while every shelter's path looks a little different depending on your community, your size, your project, they're all relying on combining several types of fundraising support to make it work. So with that overview in mind, I'll hand things over to Nikki, who's going to start talking about the first piece of the fundraising stack, foundations, and share some practical tips on how to approach them.
Thanks, Stephanie. Before we dive into the funding groups, it's really important to talk about building your prospect list. You're going to want to start with what you already have. So think about your community connections, the small businesses, your board, and your board's networks, and build on that. You can research local businesses and professionals in your community, including doctors' offices, lawyers, and insurance brokers. And make sure to check out your local Chamber of Commerce for a business directory to help you with this. Make note of the stores and banks in your community as well as their head offices. Ask your board and volunteers who they know that might care about your project, and keep building your list outward by finding both regional and national funders. Don't forget to keep track of your progress. This is so important. You have to keep track of your contacts, deadlines, results, and don't let not having a CRM hold you back on this if you don't have one. Excel will work just as well. The key is that this is a living document and it's always going to be growing and changing, and it's a list that can be utilized for the rest of your career at your organization. Now on to the funding groups, starting with foundations. Foundations will often say that they don't fund capital projects, so make sure you read their funding guidelines carefully. Just because they don't fund bricks and mortar, though, doesn't mean that they can't help. You can consider reframing your ask around other needs like supportive programs, furniture, or other pieces that will then free up funds for the construction. Foundations really care about alignment, so make sure to emphasize your organization's values like safety, equity, and inclusion. Try to share survivor stories when you can and community needs to show the impact your organization has and how their support will help survivors and your community as a whole. If you submit an application and it gets denied, don't be scared to reach out and ask if they're able to provide feedback so you can strengthen it for the next round and for any other applications you end up submitting. It's also really important to make sure you're working harder or smarter, not harder, because you already have so much on your plate. So make sure you create templates for your project descriptions, your organizational background, board list, budget, etc. Because most foundation applications are going to ask for these same things, and having it all prepped and ready will save you so much time instead of having to go looking for them each time you're submitting an application. Now for corporations, corporate giving, there we go. Corporate giving takes a lot of time. It can take 6 to 12 months for decision, if not longer, and accepted applications often come with conditions or restrictions. The big key here is to start early and be patient. National brands will often fund programs, but will probably be hesitant to fund capital projects. Local branches, on the other hand, have the ability to be more flexible. So keep that in mind with, your grocery stores, your banks, hardware stores, etc. Don't forget to check in with your contacts to see if they have connections to help you build these relationships. Now, recognition matters, but it's really important not to overpromise. Only begin to discuss naming or recognition once you're certain the project is moving ahead. And don't forget, persistence is key. Think about how your project ties into corporate priorities like equity, inclusion, community safety, or women's leadership, and use that in your conversations and applications over and over again. Back to you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Nikki. And so the final little group there we're going to talk about is individual donors, who are often the most flexible and transformational source of support. In many projects, early lead gifts from individuals are the ones that really get things moving and usually come from those individuals, not institutions. These could be longtime donors who are ready to take their giving to the next level, community champions who believe in your mission, or local philanthropists who want to make a tangible difference. Sometimes it could be people who are thinking about legacy gifts or gifts of shares. The most important message with this group is to start cultivating relationships early. You don't necessarily need to wait until you're far along in the process. Begin by sharing your vision, keeping people informed, and inviting them to take part in the conversation. Fundraising really starts with relationships, conversations, attending community events, talking about your future plans, even asking for advice rather than money. These can all be incredibly effective ways to build connection and trust. And these early informal conversations can often lay the groundwork for a major gift later on. So we know that a lot of what we're sharing today touches on the challenges many of you are already facing, and some of these themes have come up throughout this session. So rather, I'm going to kind of repeat them, but also talk about a few of the common ones we hear. So the first one is, again, foundations don't fund capital. That is true, but it doesn't mean the door is closed. Again, look at what else they might fund so that you can free up dollars elsewhere to put towards the capital project. You're really reframing the ask with this group. Another challenge we hear all the time is, but we don't have a fundraiser on staff. Many shelters don't, and that's completely okay. What can help is carving out even a small amount of dedicated time for fundraising. That could mean blocking an hour or two in your calendar each week for prospect research, follow ups, board engagement, which is really important that you don't forget your network, volunteers, board members, community allies who can open doors and make introductions that you might not have access to on your own. We also hear, do we need to launch a capital campaign? And the answer is not necessarily. As Kyla touched on earlier, a campaign can be a great tool when you're ready, but the early stages of fundraising are really about conversations, awareness, relationship building. Some of the important work happens quietly, well before there's ever a campaign title or thermometer. Those early one on one discussions, listening, asking for advice are what builds the trust and momentum that makes a campaign successful later on. Most successful capital campaigns don't actually start publicly until 60 to 70% of the goal is already committed. So it's absolutely okay to take your time, focus on the building blocks, and keep the emphasis on relationships. So, really, the message I hope you walk away is that these challenges are common. They don't mean you're behind or doing something wrong. They're all just part of the process. And to wrap up, I just want to share a few practical steps that we hope can help you strengthen your fundraising readiness no matter where you're starting from. First, take a look at your CRA charity listing. It's such a simple step, but one a lot of organizations overlook. So take a few minutes to look up your organization on the Canada Revenue Agency's charity website and see how you're reflected there. What programs are described? what's your revenue and expense breakdown, and whether it feels accurate. This is where major donors, especially foundations, will look when they're doing their own research. So it's important to understand how you appear publicly. If anything's outdated or incorrect, the CRA has a process for updating it, and it's worth doing. Second, start building your templates. This could be things like your organization's background, your financial statements, your board list, a project description, which should clearly outline what the project is, why it matters, how much it will cost, and what the impact is. Having all of these ready will really save you a huge amount of time down the road when opportunities come up. As Nikki mentioned, start building and maintaining your prospect list. You don't need, a CRM. You can do it on a spreadsheet, but you really want to track, who are the relationships? When did I last reach out to them? When is my next outreach? What are next steps? Next, engage locally and really promote your project everywhere, whether it's on your website, you have an option on your donation page, or even put it in your email signature. It helps raise the visibility and makes it easy for people to connect with your vision. And finally, remember, fundraising starts with conversations, not asks. Don't be afraid to ask for that advice as well as support. Often those conversations could lead to introductions, new relationships, that might be even more valuable than a single donation. So hope those are a few simple, practical things that you can start doing sooner rather than later. Things that don't require a big budget or extra staff, but might help building momentum over time. So I'll leave it there for now, but looking forward to reconnecting a little later, and always here for thoughts or questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nikki and Stephanie. Lots more good advice and good information there. Another plug for the Q&A box. I do see some really good questions coming in as we go through, so make sure you pop your questions in and add to that so we can have a great Q&A period at the end. And with that, I will pass it over to Melissa.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen. I can't tell that I shared it properly. Is it shared properly?
It looks
Thank you.
great. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I should not be allowed to be responsible for technology, is the truth. Thank you to Women's Shelter Canada for inviting me to join this panel and share a little our experience at YWCA Regina. As I was listening to the two presentations before, I was like, yeah, and how nice it would have been to know those things ahead of time instead of feel like I was bombarded with what felt like another wall or barrier, when in fact it is just what the process sort of looks like. So I would like to say that what they outlined in those two presentations very much has been our experience here as well. And I've put together some slides and thoughts to sort of show you what that looked like for us, some of the things that are part of it, and then to share my experience as the CEO of the organization. So we built a 98,000 square foot facility called the Kigashkita Noah Center, which is both shelters, second stage housing, outreach drop-in. We also have childcares, social enterprises, and it's really a wraparound service sort of model for women and children in our community. And I put together what I think are the questions people might want to know and have, but please do ask questions if there's anything that I didn't include in this. I wanted to show a little bit about the pieces of how you set yourself up and where you go from, and the reality of what that looks like for us. But I now know it is also sort of the reality for many people. And there's a lot of words on here, and these are being shared. So please feel free to, I really set these up so that you could read them afterwards. But I wanted to talk a little bit about our reason why, our idea, and where it came from. And it was really from a risk mitigation perspective of what our organization needed to do to move forward, and also what was going on in our community. Um, and I think that we started in 2016. So when we talk about when the idea starts and when it actually is complete, we moved in October of 2024. So while that feels like a very long time from start to finish, it went by in a blur, just an absolute blur. So I would also like to set that tone for what this kind of journey feels like if you're just starting it. There was conversation about everything that needs to happen ahead of time and some of the pre-funding opportunities that there are. There's always a catalyst that's going to like punch you forward. And, sometimes that can be that you've got money in your coffers, as was described before, and you're about to use it. For us, it was land. There was a catalyst, and it felt like the first 3 years, I'll say, because we received land in 2019. We had the idea in 2016. Those 3 years felt like we were just really trying to chase that catalyst and what that is. But I also want people to be aware that to get there, to get to the point of getting land, we had to invest money. And we did get CMHC seed funding. A loan particularly, it's not easy. I had to invest money before I'd even get the seed funding from CMHC. So I also want that, unless that funding source has changed, the seed funding is only for projects that they feel will actually go forward. So it's like post-seed funding. It's like they're giving you funding for the I don't know the analogy to use, the trunk of the tree, but not the seeds that are going into the ground to grow the tree. I just want to be clear on that, because it was really disappointing to see some of that seed funding. You had to be kind of further along than what I expected to have to be. So we invested about $300,000 in the following things that are on this screen to get us to a place that then we could apply for seed funding. After which time, from 2019 to 2022, so before we got major funding, but now we had land, we had a catalyst, people were starting to take us seriously. We invested about another $600,000 from our operations. Some of this was that $150,000 grant from seed funding. And we also did receive from some foundations, some seed funding money as well. To get us through this piece. But if you have money in the bank, that is wonderful. If you've been saving, you've got reserves, this is where you should use it. I also wanted to speak to the point of project management that was spoken before. There is absolutely no doubt that this is a full-time second job. I will say the project management of something like this is a full-time second job. Fundraising is a full-time second job. And you really have to think about, as the leader of an organization or a senior executive of an organization, what role are you going to take on and where are you going to bring in resources? The fact that Women's Shelter Canada has project management support is unbelievable. Like game changing, I will say, because I spent from 2016 to 2020 without a project manager. So I wrote project charters. I mean, I Googled, what does a project manager do? And then I saw the templates, and then I'd write them on the weekend, because I needed these things put in place to get my board on the same page, to get funding sources. I needed to have them in place, but we did not have the operational dollars to be able to put money forward on those things. And so I spent a lot of time just off the side of my desk doing that work. And if I were to do this all over again, I would really try to build some reserves, if I can, operationally, so that I had that money to hire project managers or consultants and those things, so that everything didn't have to be so lean those first couple days. These are words of different reports we bought sometimes, or different reports we got. Sometimes you'll find in this process that you'll need a report just to say you have the report. I'm going to be very honest with that. It's not helpful necessarily, but sometimes you need to have the consultant to give you the report to say we did it. So things like site options analysis, things like traffic assessments. This is about making sure that your neighbors understand what you're doing. We had a kitchen consultant report, a safety report. Sometimes these things aren't actually meant to help support, but they're documents that levels of government then say, okay, they've done their due diligence in thinking about this. The one report that I'll say is the starting catalyst would be a needs assessment report. And while I'm sure everybody on this call has the ability to write that report, probably, I'm not going to say better, but just as well as a consultant, it really does matter that it's validated through a third party. A needs assessment was very helpful in saying, yes, this is needed in our community. It added to the value proposition, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, I also wanted just to share with you folks some of the ways in which I reported to the board and where major decision items happened. This will be very different for different organizations depending on the level of governance structure of your board, but I did want to ensure people understood how important it was to bring folks along. But we had very little decision points with our board. And if you have the capacity to be in that kind of situation, if your board is very governance, then really think about what will be important for them to make decisions on and what won't, because that can really trip you up in the piece. And so for us, our board is very much a governance board. There were very few decision points that I asked of them, but there were many, many points of reporting that came in. So this is a list of those things, and you can see that there's really only approvals, well into it when I had to start to say, yes, you can have a capital budget. And a great piece of advice I got from my colleague at YWCA Calgary was that I had an approval of an envelope that I could spend, that I could go forward to spend an envelope, because that bottom number, as you'll see in the slides coming up, changes drastically as you move through a project like this. So I wanted to give you a little bit of an idea and a heads up of how a budget changes and to think about this very realistically. The very first budget we ever had was for 35 million in 2018. And this was based off of advice I had gotten around per square foot new build. We knew nothing really except for the elements that we were putting in. Very, very Class D. In June of 2022, it went up to $60 million. That's a huge increase. And of course, you will know this was after COVID. So in the meantime, we got the land at a $35 million budget. We also had plans on selling our current building, which was we used that even though it hadn't been sold yet. We used that as our portion. When talking to the city about giving us land, that's who we got land from, was the city of Regina. And then once we had the city of Regina land, then we could show that we were going to put in the sale of our building, and the city also gave us land. So now we had two things, because you'll find yourself in a dance of who's going to do what first. And that's the previous presenters talked about that a little bit. There's this dance of who's going to come first. When you can put yourself first with something, that's always the best. But certainly once the city came forward with land, that upped our game big time. We had put contingency in. I think we all know what happened with COVID and the cost of things. But I will say that at 30% contingency on your budget, it wasn't even close to enough. And at one point, when you apply for federal funding, with ours was through CMHC, and of course we just learned that program has sunsetted, but if there's going to be new funding available, it is best to have as much contingency built into that, because when they make that decision at that point, there's no coming back to say, oh, inflation just hit us, we need a little bit more. That it is like done and done on those grants. Exceptions are very, very difficult to get. So I would say give yourself a lot of contingency in this budget workbook that you're doing. ours went up to 70 million. So from 35 million in 2018, we ended the project at 70 million, and our scope had not changed drastically, and we value engineered a whole bunch down. So this gives you an idea of the costs of things. You can see that construction is obviously going to be your biggest cost, but I also worked in here fund development costs. And we built a fund development team internally. We did not have this when we started the project, so that other job I had on the side of my desk between 2016 and 2019 was to learn everything I could about fundraising. And when the folks talked about where to get started on that, I gave myself a goal of meeting with at least 20 people in the community every single month for a solid year. And I met with people who do fundraising, and I picked their brain. I only asked them questions and advice. I didn't ask for money. I asked for connections. Who else should I talk about? I talked to developers in the city. I talked to leaders, people who had influence in the city. Like I said, I talked to fundraisers and tried to learn as much as I could about what does it take. So by the time I was decided that I was going to hire internally, and we were going to build a fundraising department internally, I had also interviewed companies that do fundraising as well. By the time I had done that, I had, 100-page document of at least 200 people I had met with and had some discussion about the project. I have an idea. I didn't have any drawings. I didn't have any pictures. I didn't have anything. I just had an idea, and I had the needs assessment. This is why my idea is important. And I had a list of 200 people that my fundraiser could start now going down a road of that prospect list that they were talking about before. So if you are uncertain where to start, I would say just start meeting with people and say, I have an idea, and this is why my idea is important to our community. Who should I talk to? And you will see that will fill up your calendar really, really fast, but it also will snowball the movement on everything. That's how we got land. That's how I found our project management team. That's how we got our construction team on board, was just because I was building those relationships in the community. And it's also how we became relevant in the community and started a buzz about what we were doing for years before. I wanted to show you, this is where our capital revenue ended up coming from. So you can see that a large chunk was from the government of Canada, and this was CMHC funding, the shelter funding, but we also raised, it's now over $16 million, but we also raised a lot of money in our community. This money came, the majority of it came from 5 donors, foundations and individual donors. 5, and during COVID. So ask big. I will tell you, our lead donor is a $5 million donation. So don't sell yourself short if you have a large budget to try and fill. I know I'm running out of time, I suspect, but I'm not going to go faster because of the translation. These are some of our success stories, what felt like it was not going to be something we could do. We actually ended with ahead of schedule. We were under budget. Our fundraising efforts, we were told when we did a feasibility study whether or not we'd have the capacity to raise the funding, we were told there's no way we could raise over $10 million in our community based off of our community. We did do that. Excuse me. And our development costs were way lower than industry standard, and that's because we brought it in-house, which now allows us to have a very solid development team in-house. Okay, these are my pictures now to show you our success story. This first picture, I never imagined that I know as much as I know about construction, or have had to learn what I have had to learn. But I want to be very clear that the people who run our organizations, or who are our staff, know more than anybody else about what our needs are. And so, be involved in it. So have a project management group that helps support you in decision making and organizing and all of that. But make sure you're not totally removed from decision making. There were so many times that a decision was made external to us that had I not been there to say, no, 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 that's not going to work, we would be in a situation where I'd be giving you lessons, a lot of lessons learned. And I traveled with our architect team and our construction team across the country looking at spaces to learn from others of lessons they've learned. And lots of people have come visit us to learn what we, because we did make mistakes, of course, and lessons are learned, but do be involved, put on the hard hat. This is a photo, of course, of the magnitude of the site as it was being built. So the Kigashikira Noah Center, this is the finished product. In our spaces, which are trauma-informed and really rooted and connected in Indigenous ways of knowing and being. We have 46 shelter beds and 72 second stage housing units. We also have a social enterprise, both a coffee shop and a secondhand store that serve the childcares that we have. And we have harm reduction. The photo on the right is our outreach area where we have harm reduction support, drop-in support, and housing support. And it's all connected to a community center that is accessible to the entire community. The concept of this was to bring healthy, vibrant community into the space where folks are also in the midst of crisis as a free labor in what it means to be part of a community and joining them in the community. We also have over 500 staff at the YWCA in Regina, and this is sort of our meeting room hub space is also in this building and space. And this is our community gathering space. So this is all open to the community. We have rooms that folks can rent and use, groups and businesses that come and rent our spaces. And this is all connected to our outreach, our shelters on one end, and our child cares. These are our child cares. And in the middle is our youth hub, which is a drop-in space that has a physician, mental health addiction coordinator for young people, and homework, GED programming, all sorts of things happen there. And we have 180 licensed childcare spaces in this facility as well. And then this is our healing space. So we have traditional medicine prep and storage facility, a healing lodge, and a sweat lodge outside as well. A space right in the center of our whole building. And this is being stewarded by an Indigenous organization that we partner with, All Nations Hope Network. And we 99-year lease this space to them for $1 as part of our work in reconciliation, acknowledging that the YWCA is a colonial organization and certainly has privileged from colonialism in the past and continues to do that. So it's very important for us to invest money into what was taken and build this space, but also have it be stewarded by a local Indigenous organization that we work with. And that is my presentation. Thank you very much.
That's amazing. Thank you, Melissa. And you were probably so focused on speaking, you may not have noticed, but once you got into the photo section in particular, there was a lot of love coming in the session here. So just wanted to make sure you knew that. Thank you. So we have one last presentation here before we get to our Q&A. So do keep putting those questions in. We did want to make sure that we shared another example that is of a smaller shelter and more rural shelter, because obviously we know folks here have a lot of different sort of contexts and sizes and scopes, so we wanted to make sure we had a few examples. The folks from Sussex Vale Transition House had hoped to be here to present with us or to us directly, but were not able to be here. So they've shared some information with Kyla and Megan to share with us. And Kyla and Megan were also really involved in their project, so can speak to it firsthand as well. So I'm going to pass it back to Kyla and Megan, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Great. Thanks, Leah. Yeah, I'm going to kind of read some notes that were sent to us from the team and then kind of add a bit more context because, yeah, thankfully, like we've got the advantage of Megan and I having project managed their build, so we can speak to a lot of the lessons and hopefully answer questions from the audience. So just to set the stage, so Sussex Vale Transition House is located in Sussex, New Brunswick. It's about 45 minutes from St. John, about an hour from Moncton. So much more rural compared to Melissa's project. And they've been successfully operating short-term housing for women and children fleeing violence since 1991. So they have a 9-bed transition house, so emergency shelter facility, and staffing is present there 24/7, where they offer a whole bunch of supportive services. So accessing resources to heal from traumatic experiences, education about domestic violence and healthy relationships, parenting support, logistical support in preparing for relocation to safe alternate long-term housing, accommodations, food, linens, and access to internet and electronic devices and security and staff are all provided to clients at no cost. So in 2016, they began to consider creating new second stage units on their site. They didn't have any units, saw a need for it in their community. So they set out to build 5 second stage units along with amenity space. So very different scale than the case study that we just had. So it's nice that we're giving a little bit of both. And I'm going to get into a little bit more of the project details later, but first I'm going to read kind of like the funding journey notes that they were on. So Sussex Vale's board of directors fundraised intentionally for a capital campaign starting in 2018, but it began as a fundraiser to actually supplement operational needs, and then it grew into monies being earmarked towards a building project. As their savings grew, the funds were invested into GIC accounts to promote further growth. And then with year upon year growth, as well as the increasing success from their principal fundraiser, which is a weekly 50/50 toonie draw, as well as some individual donations, an estate gift as well, they were able to raise just over $1 million by the time that they were ready to break ground with their building project. So if we're thinking about like the nest egg that we talked about earlier, that's there. It's kind of got a couple different layers to it. And I love the way that Melissa describes like this catalyst. For them, their catalyst was a donation of land for their building and the $1 million that they were able to collect. And then just a note on their 50/50 toonie draw, it's this regular, very successful fundraising initiative that they do weekly. So everybody in the community can give a toonie. Half of the funds each week go to Sussex Vale, and then the other half are won by somebody whose toonie is drawn. It's wildly successful. A bunch of people in the community. I mean, somebody wins every week. That's very exciting for them. And they've got volunteers who take care of this for the organization. So the $1 million was really helpful for them to reflect their organization's ability to manage funds and competent leadership behind the project as they approached different government organizations and foundations. So again, kind of like speaking back to like what Melissa was saying, where, you know, they're showing, hey, look, we're in this too. We're bringing all of these funds. Like, are you going to also kind of come to the table and support? And then they actively began moving the project forward with a steering committee. And then again, similar to Melissa, I love it. It's perfect. So many things aligned. But Julie was the project manager and the executive director of the transition house. So doing 2 jobs at the same time. And they ran into challenges when they were trying to have both federal and provincial funding and not knowing kind of like who to prioritize and which one was more stringent. And so they had drawings, but then they didn't match one of the others. So they kept having to go back, make changes. And like she says, quote upon quote upon quote redone. So all the while happening at the same kind of timeline during COVID, right? Like they're starting in 2018 and they're saying that it essentially doubled the cost of their project. So eventually they had to find a new contractor as well. Their builder kind of couldn't just keep hanging around after 3 years of not breaking ground. So they even had to change up team members. They're also saying that they applied for funding streams that they were unsuccessful for because it was either oversubscribed or they weren't meeting criteria that it wasn't really clear that they needed to meet. And they'd been counting on those funds. So then they'd have to kind of continue to rely on their fundraising or looking for alternate funding sources. The big things that they're saying that were helpful for things to be able to get off the ground is actually when we were able to come on board. So we joined their team in January of 2023 to help them kind of move this project ahead. And, you know, coming back to, it's really hard to do this off the side of their desk. It's nice when you actually have another person who can dedicate a lot of specific time to this. But they also noted that they sought advice from their local provincial sister organizations who had also recently built new second stage housing, which was very helpful and a lot of lessons learned. So we do have a few photos, which is nice. I'm going to share my screen and it seems like this group likes photos, so that's exciting. I'm just going to take a quick second here. Sharing, perfect. I'm going to make this full screen. There we go. So this is a nice drone footage shot that we got. So up here at the front off of the road, this is the existing emergency shelter, which has their 9 beds. Then there's already an existing little extension that they lovingly call the barn. It did end up having actually some foundational issues that we had to fix during construction. But that's more so where like the office space is. And then all of this big L shape is the new build that we did. So the smaller side is all of the amenity space. In that amenity space, there's an office, boardroom, community room, laundry room, and children's playroom. The children's playroom being in this corner. And then down the longer side of the L is the 5 units. So they're kind of like townhouse style. Everybody has their own front and back door. At this point, the grass was not growing yet, and we hadn't put up the fence, but those do come in later. And yeah, I'll just go through the photos. So this is from the back. So this was off of the community room, come out to this, what is now grassed area, and same with the children's playroom, and then each of the units back on here as well. And you can't see it from the picture, but there is no development. It just backs onto like a giant field and then is eventually a factory. And they're the ones, so although Sussex Vale owned their initial building, they didn't own this land. And it was the owners of kind of like the factory that donated the land for the project, which is great. Just another shot. Actually, the grass is kind of growing in on this one. Still no fence yet though. And then this is the front. So yeah, Megan and I were actually able to attend the grand opening for this one. Took a lot of these photos here. This one was from the construction group though. For anybody who's in New Brunswick, Sussex does this really cool hot air balloon festival every year. So this is just the construction crew that happened to have snapped this shot. Oh, it was really cool. This is on the grand opening. Here's Julie, who's unable to attend today, but who has been on this project, yeah, since 2016, put in so much work, so many stressful hours and a lot of time on this. So this is the grand opening. The news was really interested, so she did some interviews for this, both on TV and print. And then, yeah, here's inside the unit. So got a bedroom on the left, that living space on the right, and the kitchen area, quite large kitchens for everybody. The bathrooms, 2 of the 5 units are accessible. This is not one of the accessible bathrooms. It's one of the ones with the tub. This is in the children's playroom. And this is in the community room. So there's kind of like this living space, but then also a kitchen. You kind of just see it over on the right there with the idea of residents coming in and using that space together. There's also a board office, that's one on the left, and the laundry room on the right. And I think that's the end. Yes. So I'll stop sharing. And then the one thing that I haven't talked about is the amount of money. So you know that it's a smaller project. It ended up costing in total $3 million. So there was the $1 million that Sussex Vale brought themselves, a little bit more even, mostly in cash reserves, but a few other areas. They're also eventually very successful with all levels of government, which is great. Provincial was the largest, a little over $400,000. Federal, it was CMHC, one of the various iterations that Megan talked about that's already shifted since then and came later than Melissa's even. We got a little less than $400,000 from them. The municipality came in with 100. And then in New Brunswick, they have this like regional development corporation. So it's kind of like this regional body. And we got almost $300,000 from them, which was great. We did have success with some foundations too. Megan did a ton of work on that kind of stuff. And although we received quite a few rejections, we were successful with family foundations for capital funding. So one of them came forward with $350,000 and a second one with $25,000. So a little bit smaller, but that's okay. Still a success. And Women's Shelters Canada, we actually also provided some money for this project of $100,000. So overall, I'd say the big story is that Sussex Vale definitely had that significant nest egg. They covered nearly a third of their total project costs. So, although it's not the like 17 million like for Regina, if you look at your total project cost percentage, they did really well for a rural area. They also had all 3 levels of government funding, as well as this other regional one, right? So you kind of got 4, which ended up being 1.2 million, and a family foundation come in with more than 10% of their total project costs, which is great. So that's how they were able to kind of fill out that funding stack. We'll go to questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's great. So we do have some questions here and we have about 10 minutes left to go through them. So I'm just going to start reading them out and mostly I think they're probably open to anyone who wants to respond. So I'll just sort of open it up to any of our panelists who want to jump in. So a question about whether CMHC or Build Canada Homes, I guess, whichever one is relevant, are they also relevant if you're thinking of retrofitting a building for affordable housing or shelter spaces, or are they only for sort of purpose-built builds? And maybe we'll give that one to Kyla and Megan first, and then if anyone else wants to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like it's like Megan said, like we really don't know anything right now. Unfortunately, it's been an announcement online. They haven't really done much talking about it either. So at this point, we don't know, unfortunately.
Sounds good. And maybe you can speak, I know it's maybe a little sort of retro, like hindsight at the moment, but in terms of CMHC, like, is that something, did they support retrofits? May they?
They did, and it's been closed. Yeah, pretty much all of their funding is closed at this point. Technically, their rapid housing substream is still open, but we heard a few months ago to get your application in within like 1 to 2 months. So I would expect that they're going to close that one probably any day, but the retrofits have already closed.
Thank you. Sort of staying on the CMHC Building Canada Homes path, someone sharing they're in a remote and rural community. They've been denied funding through CMHC 3 times now because it's a 5-unit design. It's too small. Even though they do have land, they do have funding from their local district. So any advice for smaller projects that might not be as attractive to government funders? And maybe again, I'll pass to Kyla and Megan first, and then Stephanie or Nikki, if you want to jump in, or Melissa, I know yours was bigger, but any final thoughts?
Yeah, I can say on the CMHC side, that's surprising and disappointing. They definitely have it in their eligibility. It's very much spelt out. And even if, let's say you were doing a shelter side, even just 5 beds technically makes you eligible. Megan and I had success with that for somebody for a seed application where it was the same kind of idea, and they were only 5 beds. It was pretty small, but they were granted the funding. And as you saw, like with Sussex Vale, so it could be talking to the representative and understanding if that's specifically the reason that CMHC has denied them, or like what we see some from CMHC programs is they're so intensely competitive. So if it was, let's say, the Rapid Housing Initiative or something that kind of had a specific date to it, it could be that they just ended up funding a different project. Sussex Vale did run into that. Unfortunately, we weren't successful with Rapid Housing Initiative Round 3. Had to go and do the co-investment one, which originally they were even linking with a loan for us. So I would want to clarify that with them. I can't speak as much to the BC housing one, and if they've got specific eligibility. I'd say the advantage of doing a smaller project, and hopefully this shone through with Sussex Vale's example, is that like your overall project costs are going to be smaller, right? Like maybe you're in the $3 million range. And for a foundation, a foundation might give the $350,000 to one shelter or another, not linked to unit costs. So in a way, that money goes further, right? And same with like your cash reserves that you're building up. So building up $1 million in cash reserves ends up being a third of your total project cost. That's amazing. Like for Regina, if they were to do the same thing, that $1 million just doesn't go quite as far. So I'd say your advantage of a smaller project is that like dollar for dollar, like your money will go further. It's just tough for the programs that are going to base it on giving you a certain amount of money per unit. That's where you're going to be a little bit more disadvantaged. But I would say to go back to your representatives, especially the CMHC one, because that doesn't seem right. That seems unfair.
I would just echo, but also add, we applied for CMHC, I think 5 times, maybe 6, and were denied, or it wasn't quite there, it wasn't quite ready. So don't give up on that. I would also recommend becoming close personal friends with your CMHC rep, or now Building Canada Homes rep, or whoever that is, because in my experience, it was that person who was the one that said, okay, something's coming down the pipeline now, a new program, a new thing, and this is going to fit perfectly. So they really steered me in the right direction of where they understood our project very, very well, and they helped navigate their system of where I should apply. So become close personal friends with that person as well, and just keep applying. They ask the same questions over and over again. So it starts to become a cut and paste exercise.
So Stephanie or Nikki, do you want to jump in at all on sort of smaller, maybe rural projects?
I think those were phenomenal pieces of advice from Melissa and Kyla. I think really the relationship building and kind of doing some sleuthing on, how do you build those connections and talk to people, are really kind of the helpful building blocks there.
Awesome. Thank you. So a question here for anyone who wants to speak to it. Has anyone on the call had success with building community bonds or investments? So I'll open that to our panelists, but if anyone in the audience has had experience with that, feel free to put it in the chat as well. So I don't know who wants to jump in on that.
Sorry, Melissa. I haven't worked on them yet. Patrick, you're probably already familiar with Tapestry, but for others who aren't, that's a great organization that's leading a lot of this stuff. I think they'll do quite a bit of work like on behalf of the organization as well. They tend to present at a lot of the affordable housing conferences and such. So I've heard their presentation a few times, but haven't done that with a project yet.
And Melissa, you were going to jump in?
I was going to say the same thing. We didn't go down that road, and but know of some that support locally. Yeah, I don't have that experience.
Awesome. Stephanie or Nikki, anything you want to add to that one? No? All right. And then a question which I think is specifically for Kyla and Megan about the SSTH program sort of services. Is it only for second stage shelters, or do you also provide support for first stage or emergency shelters?
I can jump in on that one. That's a good question. So we're happy to schedule a knowledge and coaching call or a one-on-one call with anyone who's doing a capital project and who needs some support or advice or just wants to talk through their project. Right now, our project funding, our mandate is to support builds that include second stage units. So it can be emergency shelter and second stage mix. It can be a second stage only building, but we do have to provide at least project management services that involve second stage housing. But again, we're happy to chat with anyone who's just looking for support or who's doing capital building. Yeah, and you can email us, and I'll put our email in the chat again for folks who want to reach out.
For sure. Thanks. And that's a good reminder that we will be sending out copies of the presentation and the recording link. And the presentations did have folks' contact information. So that will be a good reminder and reference. That'll probably be coming in the next week or so. I don't see any other questions in our Q&A, but I'm going to give it a few seconds in case anyone wants to throw something in there at the last minute. Um, every time I start wrapping up a webinar, a new question appears. So maybe I've learned my lesson. I will pause. um, but we're pretty much at time here. So I will sort of start to say thank you to all of our wonderful presenters today. You provided such a wealth of information, some really great tips and starting places for folks thinking about this. So thank you all so much for being here and for sharing your knowledge and expertise and experience. Thanks as well to our interpreters who've helped this session be available to more folks, to everyone who came out and joined and had your questions. That's, yeah, always great to see everyone here. We are going to put a feedback survey link in the chat, and when you close your Zoom, it will also sort of pop up in your browser. Please do take like 5 seconds. It's literally so short to fill that in because it does help us just have a sense of what to do differently next time, what else you want to hear and learn about. So do fill that in. Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks everyone. I don't see any more questions, so I will say goodbye. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you all soon. Thank you.